We thank you so much for watching Law School Made Easy at Law School Made Easy 256. We want to continue with our second episode, only that because in feudalism there is the development of the law, so we shall not put them together with mercantilism. So we shall have episode 3, which shall be the mercantilism stage, and then its law, development of law in the mercantilism. So in this second episode, we are only going to discuss feudalism and then the laws which developed during this stage of feudalism. Now, it is very important for us to note, like I said in the first episode, that feudalism, when discussing the history of tort, let us first appreciate the activities which were in that society and what was developed in that society. When we appreciate the activities in that society and what was developed, what was the means of production, how were the people in this society living, that is the only way we shall be able to juxtapose and regate the laws which were developed in that particular society. So you can see now that the Gentile and the slave have given us now a foundation. Now we enter into what we call the feudalism. Now, after the collapse of the Roman Empire, the urban centers started to deteriorate, to come to an end, and now people in the feudal society reverted back to what we call rural life. Because the Roman Empire, remember, we agreed that this was the instrument of coercion. So as it declined, even the urban life, the urban centers also started to decline in this stage of feudalism. And what people had at mind now was to revert back, to go back to their rural way of life, how they used to live before the coming of the Roman Empire. Now, I want us that it is this stage when people now have gone back to live in the rural areas. It is this stage when we see now the common law developing, that we have the common law, which is now a basis of the laws we use today. This was around the time when the common law was developing in this stage. Now, it is very important to note that the economic base in this stage was feudal life, and we have what we call the serfdom. People were under serfdom, and we have the serfs. It is in this stage of feudal society that we have the serfs who are absolutely tied to the land. That the serfs were tied to the land, and the strongest means of production was agriculture, but this agriculture was done at the small scale. And the instruments of production in this stage, because we have agreed, this is a stage where we have the serfs coming up, we have the feudal lords, we have the serfdoms, and these people are tied to the land because land becomes their means of production, is by far the greatest means of production in this stage. Now, the instruments of production which were used in this stage of feudalism were plows, harness, and water wheels. That is what they used for their small scale agriculture. And at certain incidents in this stage, they would also use animals to plow, simply because animals would help them to cultivate, since they were cultivating on small stage. Number 2, in this very stage, an element we see that on the outskirts there was handicraft industries which had also developed on the outskirts of the society. Remember what we said in the previous society, that when people were separated and migrated, moved to different areas, they formed what came to be known as a colony. So in the colonies where they were, they now started to have handicraft industries. Now you can see where we are going, that we are appreciating the things which have developed in this stage. Now, if you hear something about the industry, you know that in the future, there are now injuries in the industry. You can see now the foundation. This becomes the foundation of tort, of the very many torts that we have today. Number two, in the due process, the serfs who were strictly tied to the land, they had a solo duty of working, and the feudal lords depended on the serfs because serfs were the main instruments of production. And the feudal depending on them, it means that the serf, to have a life, they would work for the feudal lords and also would pay rent in terms of kind. For example, that they would work for the civil lord to be able to stay online. It meant that you are working for the feudal lord, or either you produce food for them, or the work you do for them is the work they calculate, and that work is now your rent. That is how the serfs who are tied to the land lived. Now, in due process, with the development of the landlords, the feudal lords, there now came the development of the guilds, who were also under the guild masters. That these guilds specifically dealt with the pottery, with the weaving and blacksmithing. That is the activity, the guilds. We're now seeing another element which we shall expound more when discussing the mercantilism, the sect of the guilds under the guild masters also arising. Now, as all this continued to work, the serfs are working, and what they work for is what they stay in, because the feudal lords are what we call the manor, are the ones, the landlords are the ones that owned the biggest chunk of land where the serfs were. Now, the serfs working and staying on this land, eventually many things developed, because for them strictly they were tied to the land, and in one way or the other they were not slaves. It is important to know that the serfs were not slaves. They were only tied to the land, and they worked for the feudal lords. And what they worked for is what amounted to their rent, and they would also produce for surplus consumption what they would use. That was the way of life in the feudal society. Now, it is important for us now to discuss the development of law in the stage of the feudalism. In the feudal state, for us to be able to appreciate the development of the law, one thing is common, that land was the biggest means of production. And all the laws which develop in the feudal society, which arise out of this feudal society, were actually aimed at protecting the interests they had in land, because land was the biggest means of production. We are saying the feudal lords, all the landlords, owned the biggest part of the land, but the serfs were tied to the land, meaning the serfs were depending on this land. So, these to apply would only work under a writ. A writ means one way of starting a legal action. That when you say you want to have a writ, it meant that it is one way of starting a legal action. And the writs which developed at the time, they were on condition that for you to succeed in any legal action, the writ you claimed before should have been in existence. That problem you are claiming should have been in existence. Where your action did not have a writ, then you were not liable to get any remedy. What do we mean here? In the development of law, we are saying that for you to come and claim that I want somebody has done ABCD, that problem you want to report, that writ should have existed at the time. Where there was no writ for what you are claiming for, it literally meant that you had no remedy. And all this we shall see in the future as we have these different episodes. We shall see that all this was meant to protect the landlords, because they were the instruments of coercion towards the majority. So they were protecting themselves, that for whatever you want to claim, it should be already written. And if you wanted to advance your writ at the time, it was only in two ways. Either by what we call the individual appeal or by the state indictment. That the only way you would raise your complaint, your writ, is by individual appeal or by state indictment. Now, around the 13th century, the first writ that developed out of the feudal society is what we call the writ of trespass. The writ of trespass is actually what developed first. Why? We have already argued that there was encroachment on land being the biggest means of production. So the only way you would protect your interests in land, the landlord, was to create the writ of trespass. And this writ was created simply because there was direct interference with people's land, and they wanted to protect the biggest means of production which was there at the time. And this writ of trespass, when developed, the very important is it was both civil and criminal. That the writ of trespass was both civil and criminal. Meaning that if you went civil, it will culminate into compensation to the plaintiff. If you went criminal, then there will be punishment of the defendant. So that is why we are saying it was a writ of trespass, and it was in two ways. Now, with the time, they developed another writ, which was the trespass on case. Having guarded their interests now, they introduced what we call the trespass on case, which today has come to be known as the law on negligence, duty of care, negligence. That they now developed negligence to continue to safeguard their interest in land. That people would claim, but now they say no, somebody should be held liable for negligence, for not doing what they are supposed to do. And eventually, this was one of the second writs that were developed in the feudal society, the trespass on case, and particularly what today has come to be known as the law on negligence. Now, moving forward on the laws which developed in here, then there is a writ which developed the case on assumpsit. The assumpsit meant that people had started to make a promises and do not fulfill those promises. So the law on assumpsit developed, which today you want to call the law of contract. That the law of contract developed on promises which were being made by people, and people were not fulfilling their promises. So eventually, we now have the law of contract, which calls upon everybody to fulfill the promises. For as long as you have agreed a contract, everybody must follow their obligations. So we see the law of contract, which is called the assumpsit, are being developed in this very stage. Further, there were so many writs which were developed. Among them was the writ of detenue, the writ of debt, and the writ of accountability. The writ of detenue was developed because of the people not respecting the chattel, the property of the others. So there was the writ of detenue, which was now introduced. Trespass on somebody's chattel. That was the writ of detenue. And then the writ of debt. This basically based on, and the writ of detenue was so much taken on the bailies. It was normally over the bailies who would take people's property and don't return them on time. Then there was the writ of debt. Debt, the way the word is, that this writ meant to enforce the collection of money, especially the landlords who had tasked, I think, the guilds to collect for them their rent money. So the writ of debt was brought to narrow the gap of people who would take away who would not want to pay people's money. The price of goods is what this writ of debt was to fulfill. Number three, and the last one is on this, the writ of accountability. That there needed to be accountability. I think this now is the current today accounts, people doing accounts and others. That a writ of accounts, accountability. That there needed to be accountability. If I owed you my money, if I did this to you, you must account. You must pay back, you must account, you must respect my property, my chattel. Those are the three writs which were developed. Then, what today we call assault, battery, and the theft. This was the writs which developed, and simply because there was infliction of injury, direct infliction of injury. That is why the writ of assault, battery, and the theft was introduced in this society. Now we can begin to just pause and grow and think. You see, now we have a community of people having handicraft industries moving on. We have agriculture moving on. We have close interaction of people working together, meaning they are bound to annoy each other, to abuse each other, to fight with each other. That is why we have the development of assault, battery, and what we call theft today. And simply because there was direct infliction of injury to the people, this is why these writs developed in there. Another writ which developed was false imprisonment. And this was taken to be battery at the time, handled in the same manner, simply because they all involved restriction of people's right. You did not get consent when you want, that there was harassment brought on people. So that is why false imprisonment at a time was taken as battery. And we see the rise of false imprisonment in this stage. Then, in the same stage, malicious prosecution was not distinguished from false imprisonment. That malicious prosecution was not being distinguished from false imprisonment. But the moment they distinguished it, it was now called the writ of conspiracy. So we see the development of the writ of conspiracy as the conspiracy as malicious prosecution. And then there was the development of the writ of nuisance. The writ of nuisance. This was meant to safeguard immovable property. That people would come and encroach on people's property. So to and claim maybe they are mad, they are what. So there was a writ of nuisance which was developed to protect all the immovable properties. And finally, in this society, there was the development of the writ of defamation. Defamation developed because you see people now are working together, they are moving, people have gained status. And the most common about it is that this writ was not available for the poor people. It was available for people who had a name, serious people, and not the poor. Simply because the poor had nothing to lose. That is why this writ was not available for them. So those are some of the laws which developed in the feudal society. We have said the writ of trespass, the assumptions which came, law of contract, the writ of debt, a writ of detenue, writ of accountability, writ of conspiracy, the writ of nuisance, the writ of defamation, and very many other writs. So we thank you so much for watching Law School Made Easy at Law School Made Easy 256. Thank you for watching. See you in the third episode, which we shall be discussing the mercantilism society. Thank you so much.